Or to the west out of the US in my case. Good evening, maybe even if you're close to Gehrman. We've got quite an internationally broad presenter group today. And my name is Feiko. Thank you for joining me and Gehrman for Vesper's bi-weekly effort to keep you updated on everything that's happening in the oils market. I'm an unfamiliar face to most of you. Some of you might have seen me come by here once. And I'm big shoes to fill, and luckily only to fill once every month, because me and Maria will be alternating this. So I'm very sorry for those, and looking forward to seeing Maria here again. Today you're going to be stuck with me, and if I do well in this audition, I hope to be back every other webinar episode. But of course, the one constant factor that you always see here, Gehrman, thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks, Feiko. I think you will fill in the big shoes well.
We'll see. I'll do my best. I do my best. And luckily, to start off, we have an interesting week. I think we're several major developments. Indonesian B50 rollout, potential EUDR delay. I think a constant topic these days. US biodiesel policy and their impact on soy oil, of course. Some rapeseed market dynamics, but also the deteriorating Black Sea sunflower situation that we're going to discuss today. But I think it might be best to start off with palm oil. What's driving the market currently?
Thanks, Feiko. So recently, let's say from the same time a week ago, if we normally look at the markets from the weekly perspective in our reports, the price declined by around $10 from the BOD Malaysian exchange. I think, the key reasons were not very sophisticated, just some profit taking, but also it's worth noting for those who follow the markets that, and I'm going to share my screen. Brent crude oil price is at quite low level at the moment. Can you see my screen, Michael? Yeah. So you can see that it's at the lowest level since May, basically. And basically briefly speaking about it, people expect an oversupply in the oil market. And also, of course, everybody is worried about the US-China situation and the global economic growth. So that's why Brent crude oil price is going down. And as we know that it's quite connected to palm oil price because of the biodiesel policy, so it's been affecting it as well. And just to add a bit of color on the demand, we see that Malaysia's shipments are a bit slow at the moment, probably because we are getting to the end of the festive season in India. And in terms of shipments from Indonesia in September, there was a quite drop, I think around 30 or 40% in exports. This was due to the export duties partly, but market participants assume that it could have led to the stock buildup in Indonesia at the end of September. But currently we see exports recovering from Indonesia, but still they're not at the same level as in August. So we see a little bit of a slower shipments from two key palm oil countries. And in terms of the stock situation, I think India looks to be well covered in terms of veg oils, and same as China. So these two large importing countries, they have quite sufficient stocks at the moment, not excessively high, but quite comfortable.
And while we're on the topic of Indonesia, is there any latest news on the B50 program for 2026? And are we seeing any supply side impact yet?
Yeah, so basically we heard that, and I think it's also in the open space, that Indonesia might not implement B50 program straight at the beginning of 2026. So they might take till June, July, actually, to do the testing on the automobiles, which is the key consumer of the biodiesel in Indonesia. So why it is important that, of course, in Q1 and Q2, where normally your palm oil prices tend to go down because the production recovers and you, for example, Muslim holidays get to the end, during which you see consumption peaks. And next year it might not happen as the market might be preparing for B50 implementation in July, right? If everything goes by plan, it means that more palm oil will be demanded in Q2, especially I can imagine. And overall next year, the new biodiesel program will require additional 3 million metric tons of palm oil in Indonesia, which is a lot. It's really a lot, and it's more than expected to be the growth in production next year, right? So that's why this factor is super important to watch. I think it's going to be the key factor for palm oil in 2026. But also, maybe quick comments. Last year, there was quite an increase in palm oil price in Q4 because B40 was discussed, right? So in 2024, C40 was discussed in Q4, so B40 for 2025, and the prices were rising very rapidly. Whereas this year, it might not happen to the same extent because we already know that it will not happen in January, B50, right? It will happen a bit later. So, and in this case, in Q4, palm oil prices might not increase, as quickly as and as strongly as last year. Still, of course, there are some supporting factors, and I'm not saying that palm oil price will go down, but it's just might not be as hectic as last year, in my view.
We have an interesting moment now. We have the $1 million question in the chat, and that is, what's the good period to confirm our order for PKO and palm oil? I think that's a really good one. I think you've started giving the answer already a little bit, but also as we're on the topic of palm, I would love to ask you what is the situation with the EUDR delay, and I can imagine your answer might be intertwined as well of these two questions. Shall we first talk about the EUDR and then go to the $1 million question to end up our palm sequence?
I think, yeah, we can do the question first, to the EUDR first, and then go to the question. So from the EUDR, basically, I think, yeah, all those who follow the news, they saw that the EU Commission might propose to grant 6 months of leeway to comply with the deforestation law. It means that there will be no, let's say, sanctions against the company, non-compliant companies within the 6-month period, first 6 months of 2026. So this is a bit of a different from the initial proposal to delay EUDR by 1 year, by 12 months. So it might be 6 months instead of 12 months. But again, it's still under discussions and everything, and voting needs to happen. And also there were additional details by Bloomberg. Again, there needs to be official confirmation that smaller farmers might be exempted from compliance with the EU EUDR regulation. Why it is important? Because this will free up some supply in quite some countries. Small holders, actually, for example, in Indonesia, they produce large amount of a certain commodity. So I think the news on the potential delay, if it does happen, and the news on the potential exemption of small farmers from EUDR compliance might mean actually more supply to the market, in this case, Europe, of course, which could be sort of a price limiting factor in this specific context. And if we look at the questions basically on the PQ and palm oil, so yeah, we of course don't give any procurement recommendations, but as we discussed, we don't see so far any, let's say, super bearish factors for palm oil, right? Of course, the correction might happen in maybe, let's say, November 8th, when the demand will cool down a little bit from India and China. But at the same time, we know that Q4 is famous for the rainy period in Malaysia and Indonesia, which slows down production. So I think at the current price or maybe slightly below, it might be an okay option to buy. And because, yeah, anything can happen. And of course, tomorrow prices might decrease by X amount, but we don't see strong bearish factors. And we think that in 2026 prices will only be higher for palm oil. For PQ, story slightly similar. I see that I recently saw that on the Sea Rotterdam, PQ prices declined a little. So could be some buying opportunities. And hopefully during the course of 2026, when coconut oil price, which is very high at the moment and which helps PKO to stay high. So hopefully in 2026, when we see more coconut production in the key origins, this year has been very bad. When we see high production, maybe Q1 or Q2, PKO will also go down. But at the moment, again, we don't see too many bearish factors for Q4 for PKO, at least at this point. Stocks are low, import demand is very good. So I think, yeah, some purchases can be already done now, and then the rest I will let you judge.
That's clear. And maybe then a side question for me about this. I think then we've answered both questions in the chat probably. What are the 3 key indicators that you're looking out for in the coming months and on the palm oil front?
Yeah, so it will be, of course, your S&D, especially in Malaysia. We'll see if rain will affect production significantly, and also the demand as we are getting to the end of the festive season in India. We'll see how the demand will play out. We might see some slowdown. It would be very interesting to see September data for Indonesia, but this will come quite late, probably in December-ish. It always comes with a delay. And any news of B50, I think. At the moment, it's more or less clear. But if, for example, the Indonesian government says, hey, we might do it later, or we might be 45 instead, I think it can make the markets quite volatile. So, of course, your supply and demand and any news on biodiesel program in Indonesia. Also, there is a bit of a chatter on plantation seizures in Indonesia that the government takes under control, let's say, illegal plantations, let's say, undeclared plantations. And people worry that this will affect productivity. The government takes the land with the palms, and then the management sort of will change. Productivity will deteriorate. But again, I think it's quite speculative, and we need to see the actual numbers. But that's also maybe one of the factors to be aware of.
A lot of fundamentals are going to be key, of course. I think some good investment features, of course, the news section where you'll find the latest on the B50, but also the Vesper chats. And I think there, of course, on the fundamental side, the S&D graphs, and that's where you can always do. But also our weather reports, I think, are a great tool to have here, published in the analysis section every week. So they're a good tool to have, also to help you keep updated on the potential risk that's happening there. Okay. Then I think we conclude our palm discovery in this section, and we'll move on to soybean oil. What's the situation there?
Yes, so for soybean oil, we saw some increases recently in the CBOT price, of course, and in the US, and also in the Argentinian price. So part of the reason that recent numbers from NOPAT, the association in the United States, showed that there is quite some good demand for soybean oil in the US, because the crush increased in September, but soy oil stocks decreased. So despite of increasing production, we still have lower stocks, which kind of could be a sign of a good buying from the biodiesel in the United States. And I would say, yeah, that's what helped soybean oil of the United States to go up a little. And in terms of Argentinian price, I think just good demand from Asia especially keeps the price supported, because soybean oil price is on par or sometimes with a little premium to palm oil at the moment, which makes it attractive to the buyers. And as conventionally, soybean oil is seen as superior to palm oil, and at the moment they are almost priced equally in the Asian markets.
We expect some more demand to go for the soy with equal prices.
Exactly.
You already touched upon the US biodiesel program a little bit, but was it finalized and how is it looking for the market?
Yeah, exactly. So that was interesting because the same organization, NOBA, indicated that the biodiesel program for 2026 and 2027, which increased a lot during the summer. So the oil price, I think I need to use the chart to maybe do some storytelling here. One second. Okay. I'm just gonna go to no. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can definitely see it.
Yeah. So you can see that some good growth happens in the US soybean oil price during the summer, which of course partly was seasonal, but also largely inspired by the news that US will introduce very significant biodiesel mandates in 26 and 27, which will require a lot more feedstock and with the soybean oil for biodiesel production, so means high soybean oil demand. But then, of course, your harvesting season happened, and also some unclarity arose regarding a few things. That the first thing is when U.S. Biodiesel program will be finalized, because it's not finalized yet, and NOPA said it might be only finalized by Q2 2026, which is quite late. If you think about that, in 2026, people already need to meet the mandates, right? That's the first thing, which keeps the market confused. And the second thing that the government said that they might exempt small refineries from biodiesel blending, but that they might reallocate this water. So they said, okay, small refineries will not do the blending, but then we will increase obligations for larger oil refineries. But again, it still hasn't been finalized. There were some discussions that reallocation might not be 100%. It might be that only 50% of the exempted volumes will be reallocated, which will mean less demand for soybean oil. So that's the second sort of unclear bit here. And the third one is, of course, that it's still, I don't think so. I don't think it was finalized, regulations around foreign feedstock. If you remember, Feiko, there was a big discussion on Chinese used cooking oil imports into the United States, that they compete against soybean oil for the biodiesel demand, and U.S. government, various, let's say, authorities proposed, okay, let's limit it. Let's limit government advantages only to local feedstock. But I don't think it has been fully finalized, at least at this stage. Maybe somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. So to conclude this lengthy monologue, yeah, even though soybean oil has good growth potential in the US and also in Latam in 2026, it's still a bit unclear when these demand driving factors will be finalized in the US.
It feels like quite an exciting role bit that regulations on both sides of the bond, whether it be EUDR or US biodiesel programs, towards the end of October are still very much up in the air and have a lot of moving parts. Of course, not an easy situation but they have very big impacts on markets. So
very irritating for the markets, of course, as was the EUDR postponement basically last year, which was done 1 month before the deadline, when everybody made the investments and adjusted the supply chain. And they said, all right, let's postpone it. Yeah, no, that's very
interesting situation where all of a sudden the regulations are the more volatile things happening. Normally they are the stability that we work off of. Well, thanks for on that. I think it's good to transition to rapeseed and rapeseed oil. How is the market looking there?
Of course. So let me go to our forward prices positions widget. Like just here. All right. And then I'm going to choose rapeseed oil. And here, by the way, maybe a quick note for those who are asking about PKO, and we discussed Loric markets. You can see that the nearby positions are quite, they have higher values than more deferred positions in 2026. I think it's well aligned with what we said, that in 2026 they're might be some improvements in the supply of cooking oil. All right, I'm gonna choose rapeseed oil. Yes. Hold on a second. All right, so and then if we choose spot price, yeah, we can see that yours. So full Dutch wheel increased from the previous week, and I think the big reason for that could be, in my opinion, the growth in sunflower oil price, which we'll talk about later. Whereas rapeseed prices were following slightly different trajectory. And if we choose here, for example, rapeseed motif, it actually declined a little bit from the previous week. And the reason for that, in my opinion, could be the good looking actually supply of rapeseed globally. And if we talk specifically in this case, so in Ukraine, they sorted out their export procedures, the new export procedures. And as I heard from local brokers, rapeseed from Ukraine is now actively offered to the European buyers. And also the local demand for the Ukrainian rapeseed is not very high. So that's another part of the supply going into Europe. And the second part, of course, is could be Canada, because normally in October, which is the peak month of Canadian canola exports, they send most of the stuff to China. But because this year they have a bit of wares from China, they will likely send stuff to Europe instead. And I checked briefly Canadian weekly exports, and already in the most recent available data, exports doubled in the previous, I think in the previous week, if I'm not mistaken. So they doubled from 80K to 160K. So it's speeding up the exports from Canada. And I think soon, in weeks' time, we might see the arrivals into Europe for it, if not already. So I think, good situation with Ukrainian supply. Of course, the growth is lower, but still the supply is available. And also potential imports from Canada. These factors could be sort of pressuring rapeseed price in my view, which does not always translate into rapeseed oil price, as we saw in the previous chart, because sunflower oil prices is quite high at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting that they both have an effect there. We'll touch upon, of course, on sunflower later, but I think as you've mentioned China now, you've mentioned Canada. Do we see any improvements there in the disputes that they're having?
There was a meeting, I think, by when the Canadian and Chinese authorities got together and discussed trade barriers from both sides. So they discussed Canadian trade barriers for Chinese cars and also Chinese trade barriers for Canadian agri. But I think there were no specific conclusions, to be honest. So I think the markets came out disappointed when they heard the news.
So for the time being, still a lot of supply heading towards Europe, and
yeah, it could be. I think we assume now we will need to check the numbers, but I think that's the likely destination, to be honest, Feiko, because it can be used for European biodiesel. And of course, not all Canadian canola is certified to be used for European biodiesel, but good portion of it can be used. So I think EU could be a possible destination, taking into account the cheapness of Canadian canola.
Here, so we're monitoring the weekly import figures closely. I think then if you move on to sunflower, which you've already mentioned as a reason for rapeseed oil prices to go up, and the situation, well, I've heard the situation in the Black Sea with the sunflower crop has significantly deteriorated. Are there any updates you can give on this? And you can show us.
Yes, of course. So if we go again to the forward price positions widget, I'm going to choose sunflower oil crude. It's exports price, and then I will remove rapeseed oil crude. And then I will keep spot prices. And then I'll choose USD. Yeah, we can see that prices are still quite strong levels, and they increased from the previous week, the spot price. And yeah, because the situation looks very different to what it was weeks and months ago. So I remember even, I think in previous webinar or the webinar or previous webinar, we were saying that the market expected correction in sunflower oil prices because the crop was expected to be better. But in just, in a week's time, and also because the S&D updates don't come often enough, we received numbers stating that actually Ukrainian crop could be even, let's say, 10.5 million metric tons, whereas in September it was expected to be, I think, 13 or 12.5. I think 13.5, if I remember correctly. So it's basically a few million tons lower than a few weeks ago. The expectation. That's massive, and that's because of mainly the unfavorable weather. So there was first some dryness that decreased the yields, and now basically massive rains in certain parts of Ukraine. If you talk about the Ukraine specifically, is basically decreasing the quality of the crop and the crop size. So instead of surplus that was expected, let's say in July, that in August people were saying, okay, crop will be in line with the previous year. For Ukraine specifically and for Russia would be larger. And then in September, people will also say, okay, Ukrainian crop would be in line with the previous year, and the previous year was bad, right? So they were saying, okay, at least it would be same as last year. So now we're at the point that analytical agencies said that it could be lower than in the previous year, much lower by maybe 1 or 2 million metric tons. And Ukraine, of course, is a big supplier of this one, of sunflower and sunflower oil. Then Russia, which is the second biggest exporter of sunflower oil, or maybe the first one now, is facing a similar situation with the crop. So first it was expected to be 18 million metric tons. Now it could be 17.5, and people say it could be further reduced. So at the moment, so if I summarize for these two big countries, big suppliers, their growth might be very bad and might be below previous year. Russian crop could be a little bit above previous year levels, but again, there is still space for the reduction of the crop forecast. So we still need to monitor what's happening in the next few weeks with the crop and crop estimates and forecasts. But the situation is pretty bad, and overall, take into account global production, beginning stocks, the supply of sunflower, if I summarize, might be either in line or slightly above or slightly below previous year. And the previous year was considered to be bad, right? So overall, we're likely to have another bad year for sunflower crop. And that's why prices stay at very high levels. And the situation is quite stressful.
I think that also answers the last question I want to sneak in there. Is that also means that the expectation is for sunflower oil prices to stay strong?
Yes, I think we did interview around 13 companies in the market, including analytical agencies, buyers, sellers, crushers, refiners, and I think 99%. I think just one company said that market will be bearish in Q4. Others said that it will likely be either flat or slightly bullish in Q4. So price will either stay at the same strong levels or maybe go up a little. And then most of the participants indicated that maybe starting in December or January, prices might start correcting with the arrival of the Argentinian supply. So that's really the sentiment that I hear about the sunflower oil price. So it's very different from what we saw weeks and months ago.
Interesting. Fundamental issue there then. Gehrman, thank you so much for sharing this, for going from palm to soy to rapeseed and to sunflower. Take us through the market once again. I won't be back in 2 weeks' time, but Maria will be back in 2 weeks' time. But luckily for us all, you will be back in 2 weeks' time. So we look forward to that. Thank you very much. And we'd hope to see you all back in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Feiko. Bye-bye.